Bonjour.
I am Aurélie, Chief Editor at Jeune Afrique, and it is my pleasure to host you this new session, which will run around an hour on the theme New International Economic Order, where do African financial institutions weigh in? As you have guessed, this discussion is an opportunity to address a challenge: how African financial institutions can reform the global financial architecture and mobilize resources for the strength of the continent. To introduce this wide-ranging discussion, here is our expert for this panel, Mr. KABEYA, Vice President, Senior Analyst at Moody's.
Thank you very much, Aurélie. Let me see if the speaker works. So, thank you very much, everyone. I'll be setting the scene with a very short presentation on the role that African financial institutions will play in addressing some of the funding needs on the continent. So, as you can see on the slides, it's going to be very short, 3 slides covering 3 topics. The first one will touch on the funding gap on the continent, which is quite important. I'll then touch on the tight financing conditions and narrow funding sources that sovereigns are facing. And then we'll touch in the third slide on some of the solutions that we are starting to see emerge in addressing this topic. Okay. So starting with the funding needs, as we all know, the funding needs are quite sizable on the continent. First of all, there's a significant infrastructure deficit, particularly for electricity and road networks. There's also deficits in terms of social demands, so difficulty for the sovereign to address an increasing request from the population for jobs, for housing, and other type of public services. And then finally, on the climate front, we see that sovereigns are facing difficulties and significant needs in addressing in strengthening the climate resilience of African continents. This is particularly important in Africa because Africa has significant exposure to environmental risk. So being resilient to climate change is an important requirement. If we move to the next slides on the funding conditions and the funding sources, you see that African sovereigns face sizable Eurobond maturities over the next few years. And the interest rates burden, basically the cost of servicing debt, has tripled for African sovereigns over the last decades. Eurobond market, as you know, have selectively reopened this year for some sovereigns. I mean, we've seen issuances from Ivory Coast, Benin, Nigeria, Kenya, and so forth. But it's at a more elevated price tag, similar to other sovereigns across the globe. And as I was saying earlier, it's on a selective basis. Financing conditions have improved and are improving, but the cost of funding will remain higher than before the pandemic, which again is similar to what we see across the globe. Another important point here is bilateral lending from China, which we believe will remain more muted than in the past as historical loans come due, but also as China has a more prudent lending approach when it comes to new loans. And then finally, domestic funding markets are developing, but remain relatively shallow and unable to absorb all the funding needs from the sovereigns on the continent. So this is my last slide, and that will touch on some of the solutions that we start to see emerging. And I'll touch on various players here. So if we start with commercial banks, we see an emergence of Pan-African banks across the continents, not only acquiring existing assets, but growing assets and increasing the banking penetration. That will be one of the sources, in our view, of widening the funding capacity. Then we have the MDBs, so the multilateral development banks, the regional ones, who are really transforming their business models. So we see an evolution in the business models, using more creative capital instruments, with hybrid capital being introduced, using increasingly forms of portfolio credit enhancements, and also introducing climate financing mandates. So these are ways that regional MDBs on the continent are using to increasing their lending capacity with the same amount of capital. So basically generating more lending without necessarily increasing the size of the capital base. A third development, which we think will also help address this topic, is the development where both regional and global MDBs are now trying to crowd in private sector investments through various types of blended finance instruments. So providing guarantees, providing seed funding, providing first loss options to basically bring in the private sector. So this is another way of using more efficiently the capital that they have on their balance sheets, catalyze the private sector to drive funding. And then the last point, which is another potential solution, is African sovereigns making the business environment more conducive, more attractive, in strengthening the banking sector, creating basically the condition for foreign investments to flow in. So in summary, the funding needs are sizable on the continent. Funding conditions are tight and funding sources are relatively narrow. Funding conditions are tight for all sovereigns across the globe. But we increasingly see solutions in terms of the growth of the commercial banking system, the evolution in the business models of regional MDBs, work between the regional MDBs and global MDBs in bringing in private sector investments, and as I was saying, lastly, the governments trying to reform the business environment and making it more attractive for foreign investments. So hopefully that helps set the scene for the panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Mick, for this instructive presentation. I am sure our speakers will use it during the session. Without further delay, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce our esteemed speakers that will join us on stage. Her Excellency Professor Dr. Hala, ELSAID, Economic Advisor for the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt. Mr. Tarik SENHAJI, CEO of the Casablanca Stock Exchange. Mr. Khaled AL-ABOODI, Advisor of the Chairman of the BADEA. Mr. Serge EKUE, President of the West African Development Bank. And Mr. Mahmoud MOHIELDIN, United Nations Special Envoy on Financing the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Thank you. Good morning to all of you, and thank you for being with us today. Something happened on December 1, when Donald Trump, President-elected of the United States, took aim via Truth Social at the members of the BRICS, which now include 3 African countries, South Africa, Egypt, and Ethiopia. In his own inimitable way, the man is to become President of the United States next month, berated them, saying, and I quote, "They will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs and should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy." End of the quote. At the same time, many observers fear that the new American president will undermine the independence of the US Central Bank and push for a cut in interest rates, thereby threatening the stability of both the global economy and financial markets. Dear participants, I think this sums up in the world we live in. An uncertain world governed by a narrow vision of national interests, and where power is the only form of diplomacy. A time when the international financial system is set against African countries, and where they can only count on themselves to change the situation. But how? How? This is the question we are going to try to answer together today. So, for the first point of our discussion, maybe we will start with the reform of international financial architecture. Dr. Hala ELSAID, I'm not sure you can speak about what happened with the President of the United States, but I've got a question for you. The financial gap, as seen during an expert presentation in Africa, remain a major obstacle to sustainable development. From your perspective, what lesson can Africa draw from Egypt's approach to domestic resources mobilization to address this challenge?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me in this very distinguished panel and in such an important conference. Well, basically, as you mentioned, and from the presentation, Africa is facing a huge financial gap. And this financial gap has been due to decades of underinvestment in major development areas, basically in infrastructure, in energy, in transport, in education. So this all have resulted in very low skilled workers in most of the economies, in addition to a very relatively low GDP per capita, which affects basically social development in most of the countries. However, the country stands on a huge arable land and abundant mineral resources. So what we need is to mobilize basically domestic resources and also complementary international resources from regional and international community. The main reason of the low economic growth is that what is happening, the continent has been facing with multiple crises, coming from the COVID-19 pandemic to the geopolitical tension, to what is the tension that is happening in the region. And basically, if we talk about Egypt, we have tension on the borders of our country. Most of the continent are characterized by basically their export base is basically low primary commodities and concentration of commodities on very limited primary commodities. So all this affects the export base, affects the growth of the economy. What we need is, first, we need domestic resource mobilization. Domestic resource mobilization will come from where? Will come from macroeconomic reforms. We need to look into our economies internally. Basically, our subsidies, most of the countries provide subsidies, so we need to reform our subsidy base. What happened to Egypt? Subsidies, Egypt saved about $8 billion of subsidies. These $8 billion that happened or came out of the savings of the reform of the subsidies, we use them to provide them to the less privileged segment of the population, basically conditional and unconditional cash transfer to the less privileged segment of the population. Second, our taxes. Most of the African countries are characterized by low tax to GDP. We're basically talking about an average 15% tax to GDP, which is relatively lower than most of the middle-income economies. So reform and digitization of our tax system helped us about 20% of, yes, it provided us with 20% increase in our tax revenues. The informal sector and accounting for the informal sector, also widening the tax base is very important. However, complementing, if we're talking about complementing the international money from the international financial institutions, regional coordination is very important. The continent need to talk with one voice. You need to advocate with one voice. We used the reallocation of the SDRs from the IMF in order to leverage for more resources, in order to increase our fiscal space, and we need more debt relief, and we need concessional finance, especially in the climate and in the green transformation. The continent can lead the green revolution. We sit on abundant green mineral resources, so we are able to advocate for the green transformation because we can have a lot of investments in renewables. We have a lot of young talent, and this is a win-win situation between the North and the South, between developed and developing countries. Europe is aging, while our continent is privileged with the demographic dividend. Most of the people, 60%, are under the age of 30, able to be trained. So we have a young talent that are able to be skilled. We also have abundant green mineral resources that we need more investment in order to pitch in for the green transformation, whether solar or wind, so we can be a hub for renewable energy. And this is what Egypt has done, transforming the Suez Canal economic zone to become the hub for renewable energy in the region.
Thank you. I now turn over you, Serge EKUE. We've just explored reforms in Egypt, and it will be over you to speak about the Africa Club and how can West African Development Bank and the Africa Club advance Africa's financial reform goals, addressing debt, SDRs, and credit risk.
All right. Thank you for having me. Well, I usually don't say that, but I have to admit that a lot has been said already. The one thing I would emphasize on is in a multipolar world in which we are today. I think the one thing that is essential, the most important asset we have in Africa is precisely the youth of our population. Again, the median age of our population, I mean, depending on the different region in which we are, but it's about 20 years. So we all know that now, and the world knows that the growth engine of the world sits in Africa, no doubt about it. And even though when you look at the situation and the evaluation, the value of our GDP, it's still it remains very low. It's 1% of the worldwide GDP, 1%. So one may say it's negligible, but the reality is that the potential and stability that could arise from a non-consideration of who we are, what we do, would lead everyone to understand that we have to be, as African, we have to be considered, because again, the destabilization potential is very huge. In an aging population world, and in an oversaving world, that may come to you as a surprise, the word is oversaving. There's a lot of capital in the world. One may even consider that there's too much capital in the world. The thing is how to rechannel or to channel the investments to Africa. And this can be done so long the whole world understands that again, the growth engine sits here. Because we have the labor force, we have this energy. Yes, we have the arable soil. We have the best solar exposure of the world. That's it's in Burkina Faso, etc., etc., etc. So, if we are smart enough to make the whole world understand that they have no other option than to deal with us, I strongly believe that we'll reach our goals. Now, the question of the debt is not the right one. Debt has never helped anyone to fund its development. The question is not the debt, the question is the equity, the question is the capital. So there are three priorities, which are one, the capital increase. We need to have a better capital structure from, I would say, core tier one up to senior debt. And going through meds, going through super senior, or super subordinated debt. So we need to strengthen the capital structure. This is one. So it's capital increase, capital mobilization, tapping the international or the domestic market. And I do agree with you. There are huge potential that needs to be tapped. That's one. The second thing is capital concentration. We definitely have too many banks, but insufficiently capitalized to face the different shocks we will be exposed to, either endogenous shocks or exogenous shocks. We have faced the COVID-19, and I'm not a Cassandra here, but one can easily predict that at some point we will face COVID, either 20, 21, 22, or whatsoever. So, and the different shocks, the movement of populations, floods, droughts, etc., etc. So, the question of the buffer that needs to be created for stronger banks with stronger capital. We definitely need in Africa the BNP, the Santander, the UniCredit, the Deutsche, the JP Morgan, or the BOFA.
They left already, no?
Absolutely. And the last thing, if I may, is the question of the capital management. Capital management, which is literally the way we deploy our capital, the way we invest in bankable projects, the way we solve the 5 major sectors we need to solve, we need to invest strongly, which are again infra, agriculture, housing, health and education, energy. So, in a nutshell, this is how we strongly believe that Africa can face the challenge and go over all the different hurdles. And we strongly believe that funding, the funding of sustainable growth, because our growth cannot be anything but sustainable, anything else but sustainable, this should be our new normal. Thank you.
Thank you. In your opinion, Dr. Mahmoud Mohieldin, how can global financial dynamics be leveraged so as Africa's voice be amplified in global decision-making?
Right. Thank you so much. Very happy with the discussion so far, and I hope whatever I'm going to say is not going to spoil the good wisdom of words that just preceded me. Let me build on the 2 interventions, linking the global developments to the regional solutions. We are in a tough world, and I think the presentation from Moody's talked about gaps. I think the worst of the gaps is the gap in political trust between the incumbent economic powers and the emerging powers, and these gaps are being really responsible for the fragmentation of the global economy. And as if 900 measures of trade restrictions were not enough before 2020, now we have 3,000 trade restrictions and more. It's not just about trade, it's about investment complications. You talked earlier about currencies, and we know that some of the currencies, the major one, is being politicized. And it's not a matter of a decision by any power to tell the world what to choose. It's basically about gaining the trust in the currency and its stability. We have seen international currencies before, from the guilder to the sterling and now the dollar, because the dollar still, despite all of the challenges the American economy faced, it still had this kind of relative stability in the monetary system, the trust, the deep markets, the rule of law, with the exception of what I said as well about the politicization. Evolution of alternative currencies could happen, but that will not really solve the economic world order. And here, this brings us to the regional answer to the global tension. As I was talking to some colleagues before this session, experts and political philosophers are always obsessed about finding a new architecture, especially when it comes to finance and economic arrangements. And that never happens just because, again, of a decision, because whatever we have today is coming out of many developments from the Second World War, the Cold War, and it's basically led by political arrangements. We cannot really wait forever to have that, but there could be the regional solutions, and that gets us into your question about the governance. As we have seen here in Casablanca a couple of days ago, in Rabat, we have seen variety of regional institutions. Some of them are government-led, intergovernmental, like the African Development Bank. Some of them have the mix of public-private partnerships. Other are private sector-led, and all of them are focusing on regional work. That shouldn't really be coming as a substitute, but complementary to our efforts to engage internationally in trade and investment in technology. And that should really come to benefit from all of the points raised earlier about the endowments that we have of natural wealth. And the most important are basically the people that in many cases, in some countries, are being seen not as a blessing, but a burden. But actually, we see that investments in the human capital in education and health could really be the firepower for the future, including actually getting these kind of main investments in change when it comes to digital transformation, AI, and issues related to sustainability. Many countries, the bigger ones in our continent, can do that with some sort of partnership. The smaller ones in size of the economy would require to augment the size by better regional collaboration, and through the convening power of the likes of the African Development Bank, what we have seen from the AFC, many of the business-led solutions as well have this kind of regional approach. Then we need to realize it's not just about getting the politics right in there. There are some good models of being pragmatic, like the ASEAN model, in which the countries, or within which the countries at some stage were in conflict, were in war against each others, but they grew in a kind of a very steady way to have one of the best dynamic kind of economic collaboration in all of the areas of collaboration, including labor mobility, plus trade, plus investment. But what we need for all of that is basically, in the point on the polarization raised earlier by EKUE, I think we need really to play it in a very smart way by not being part of any of these kind of tensions that we have seen. And actually, there is very much likely to be seeing more tensions again between the incumbent powers and the emerging powers. So we mind our own business, maximize the benefits from whoever want to fight in wars of economy or currency, They can mind their own business. As much as we can here, we need to be strategic. We need really to emphasize the peaceful solutions. And we need really to believe that the opportunities are there, especially even with the skepticism. I just gave you two things of good statistics that are coming from the IMF and the Economist magazine. From the IMF and the Economist, they reminded us that in 2025, we'll see 20 countries around the world with high growth, more than 6%. Half of them are in Africa. This is one. Second one, everybody, including now, and when we're about talking about risk, perceived risk, actual risk, the latest report on the emerging markets risk by the multilateral development banks, this is the GEM, this is the general database for defaults of credit, and we have our friend from Moody's here, he can correct that as well, that the default is much, much lower actually than what is being perceived. Can we really rely more on such potential of growth of 10 countries of the continent and others to follow? Can we rely more on accurate information and fight the disinformation, including from people like you in your role in the media? If there is some sort of high risk, some great problem, some corruption, please reveal that. But at the same time, we cannot really be forever victims of bad perceptions and bad judgment. And it's not just a loss for the African countries, it's the loss of partners of finance and investment that are missing good and decent opportunities. If you play the golden rule between the risk and the return, they are missing a lot by not investing adequately in the continent and its opportunities.
Okay, your voice is here, I think. Tarik, SENHAJI, we would like to know how financial institutions like the Casablanca Stock Exchange can contribute to strengthening Africa's financial actors.
Yes, good morning. I'm really sorry, but I have to point out there is a typo in the title. It should read New World Economic Disorder.
Maybe.
So let me maybe contribute where I'm more comfortable being a capital markets guy. So, I mean, the volatility is driven by a lot to do with debt. And today, the world is, or the economic world is saying, no, the African countries are too much in debt. We can't lend them. We can't lead anymore their bonds. So the ratio of debt to GDP is 60% in sub-Saharan Africa, while the US and France debt are doing extremely well, while still being 130% of GDP and 115% of GDP. So yes, there is certainly an issue with the perception of the risk in Africa. But that's not the only reason. The second reason is sometimes you have to be careful not to let the debtors tell you what to do. So I was once with the CEO of a listed company, and he was addressing the crowd, and he said, look, I'm very happy with the investors in the stock exchange in my stocks, because when I'm happy and I make money, they make money and they laugh with me. And when I lose money, they cry with me because they're losing money as well. He said, oh, the guys who are my debtors, it's quite the opposite. When I make too much money, they cry because I'm going to reimburse my debt. And when I am losing money, they are happy because they can negotiate better spreads. I think the point of this story is that it's important as well that African countries find their model, and it's a development model, and it's not something that they should just piggyback on what's happening in other markets which have evolved over hundreds of years. And so I think as well it's important, maybe I'm the bad guy here, but to say as well that African countries have to have their own framework, but it has to be a framework that is respected. And in financial market, it is important, like in any person that is going to lend you money, that when you promise something, then you do it. And if what you're promising is too much for you, then from the start you should say, no, I want to renegotiate the framework. And that's something very important. The second, maybe, and the last point, which is very important, is what you talked about, and others have talked about resource mobilization. And resource mobilization, yes, all the points that have been made are good. I'll be a little bit more technical and talk about what capital markets can do for you. And it's very important. We had a reform in Morocco in 1993, which was an exceptional reform. We did it. Also, it was a fantastic reform because we had no choice. It was just after the IMF restructuring. And so we had to take hard choices. And one of the beautiful things about this reform, it didn't talk only about the stock market, a regulator, and all the other things that people rush to do, but it also talked about a lot about having institutional investors. It forced insurance companies to set money aside and have those in investable market instruments, which meant that suddenly insurance companies had to buy government debt, local government debt. It did the same for pension funds. And I think that's something that's maybe not paid enough attention to, because the shiny thing is, well, we have an exchange. The more important thing is how I'm going to mobilize long-term resources. And I would really say that this is something extremely important. Morocco has, for example, the second largest asset management industry in Africa, which obviously we're very happy with, but it's not normal. There are bigger countries that should be able to put a framework and force those long-term investors to invest in their countries and to invest. The most important is not to invest in your country, it's to invest long-term, because then you're matching your needs. You have a lot of needs which are long-term and very specific. You're matching those long-term needs with long-term resources. Morocco, the sovereign, has issued 30-year bonds in the local currency in 2006, I think. So I think that's an important point that I wanted to make in this discussion. And the last thing maybe is you have to be very conscious about putting priority in what you're doing. For example, we import a lot of financial engineering from outside. So I'll just give an example. 2 years ago, everybody in the market was like, oh, we should do SPAC, we should do SPAC. It was just the latest fad in New York. Look, we still have maybe 50 years to work before that. So it's important. So we took a decision to, quote unquote, marry the stock exchange with the private equity industry. In a lot of developed countries, it's the opposite. They play once against each other. So you have to be smart and make sure that you find that model that is going to work for you. But also you have to, sometimes too much choice is not good. You have to reduce the choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Khaled AL-ABOODI. In 2023, your institution set up a sustainable development framework in its bond issuance program. Given BADEA's focus on enhancing Arab-African partnerships, how can it support green growth initiatives in Africa within this framework of global financial reform?
Thank you so much. Let me say in the beginning, I enjoy very much the discussion over here and the source of the problems that Africa is suffering from. I think let's admit, international interest in Africa is actually rising for the wrong reason or for right reasons. But at the end of the day, Africa interest should prevail. And BADEA being, a development finance institution focused on Africa, active since the 70s, we have seen it all. We have, seen many development theories being tested in Africa, from, country-led development, which led, unfortunately, mostly to, less development but more debt, to, trying to, bring the private sector through various initiatives, PPPs and everything, from, a balanced development to export-led growth strategies, which led to the multinational companies having access to countries with little governance. So it has been a testing grounds, unfortunately, for many development, theories, and I agree with Tarik that I think, countries need to find out their best development framework to work in. As BADEA, we're there to support. We are a multilateral institutions created by the Arab countries to support Africa development, and we identify several things to do on that. Over the years, of course, mostly we finance infrastructure, but also we're doing more and more trade finance for Africa, especially focusing on the inputs that needed for, the agribusiness, for example, whether it's fertilizer, pesticides, or chemicals, which the Arab countries actually are major producer of. To energy, companies like ACWA Power is actually major renewable energy partners that been, doing good jobs in Africa. But, is that enough? I mean, always the question was, do we have enough resources for Africa? I think the question should be, are we using the existing resources more efficiently? Of course, definitely there is a gap. Infrastructure gap, that will probably take 5 to 10 years to be fully addressed, because without that, the value-added contribution to the economy's local economies will not happen without the infrastructure that was cited by the presentation by Moody's. So trade finance is important, but also what BADEA has been doing is actually to engage more in private sector. BADEA has started as, just focusing on financing public sector, but a few years ago started private sector activities providing financing to private sector in Africa, and trying to engage partners from the Arab countries in these projects. And this is where I think the major initiative will come in future. But nonetheless, I think what happens in Africa actually, the game changer is actually the realization of the African leaders to come together and create initiative like the free continental trade agreements, initiative to bring in more funding like the last week the Africa Business Forum, the creation of Casablanca Financial Center. All of this, I think this is a major development that will make sure that not only you mobilize resources in a bigger amount, but also to efficiently use these resources. And of course, the governance issues has always been there, and the question is that, the fear is that, once Africa is resolving one issue, another emerging issue is coming, climate change and all of these things. And, I think it's too much for Africa, but as a development partner for Africa, we're really committed to do this. And I think, from our new location in Saudi Arabia, we will be trying to do more and more in terms of engaging the private sector, especially institutions and investors in the area, by providing our comfort to them to do more in Africa.
Okay, and now we move quickly to solution and governance, because you were so inspired by the reforms and you try to explain solutions also. So I stay with you, Khaled AL-ABOODI, because I will ask a question that will be both in solutions and governance. On our markets, let's not kid ourselves. There is a cursed name, illicit financial flows. In your practice with BADEA, how can you fight the impact of these flows on resource mobilization? How can you fight illicit flows to mobilize resources? And we have 2 minutes by each, if you want to speak, everybody.
Yeah, as I said, I think, bringing more private sector is definitely an answer for that, especially with the liquidity that we have, especially in the Gulf. I think, there are a lot of liquidities. I remember a few years back, IFC was actually talking about the liquidity in Europe, in the pension funds and, insurance companies at $8 trillion. And we said if we can get just a fraction of that, we will be supporting development. But that's not an easy, solution. I think if the direction of the Gulf countries now to open up to Africa, I think more resources you will see, not just from the public institutions, where the Saudi Fund for Development, for example, promised $10 billion, and the Saudi Exim Bank is also having a similar initiative, but also from private sector. Because if the government direction is to, enhance the relationship, and this is South-South relationship, Africa is not very far from the Arab countries, then that direction will also, the signal will come to the private sector. So, yes, it's increasing, but more can be done.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hala has said, over you, given your experience, how can African institutions, including members of the Africa Club, foster stronger governance framework, regional collaboration maybe, to achieve this goal?
Well, definitely regional cooperation is key in this respect. And I think one of the main good ideas is that for the African financial institutions to allocate a certain percentage of the reserves to invest in African institutions. I think this is very important. We need our money to be invested in our central banks, in our financial institutions. I think also advocating for one voice in the negotiations is very important through the African Club. But one of the very important things is that we need to mobilize private sector. So enhancing the role of the private sector through enablers. Private sector in the type of investment that the continent needs is a long-term investment. And long-term investment needs one, de-risking. So you need a sort of a de-risking either through public sector money. So you need the African Club or the regional institutions to pitch in money in order to make the finance affordable. Banks in most of the African continent have short-term, provide short-term to medium-term loans. We need more long-term maturities in order to make the long-term investment affordable. Otherwise, it will be high costly in projects like water desalination and electricity distribution. So you need banks to start, you need the regional institutions to support local banks in order to provide them with blended finance, IFI plus private sector plus local money in order to provide long-term affordable finance. PPP projects are very important. That's why the de-risking and the enabler from the public money is important. Also have support sovereign wealth funds in countries. Innovative tools like sovereign wealth funds that acts like an investment arm of the government. However, it provides de-risking. It crowds in private sector money. So supporting regional institutions, supporting sovereign wealth funds and the establishment on sovereign wealth fund and providing finance to sovereign wealth fund is very important in the African continent.
Thank you, Dr. Hala. Serge EKUE, maybe you can answer to the role of MDB because Dr. Hala ELSAID mentioned a lot the role of regional institutions. So in 2 to 3 words, how can West African Bank can contribute to this better collaboration with the local framework?
The factor we have created an ecosystem, including naturally BOAD, BADEA, Afrique, the African Development Bank, Trade and Development Banks, DBSA in South Africa, we have understood a number of things. The first thing is, yes, we have to add our balance sheet, clearly. Yes, we have to abide with the initiatives and the decisions that we have collectively taken, and that are, by the way, well written and well presented in the capital adequacy report that has been released last year and presented at the G20. Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic document. You go through it, everything is in there. Now, the only thing is we just have to get the job done. That's it. But we know what to do and we know how to do it.
Thank you. Maybe a last question for Tarik SENHAJI. Morocco is not part of the Africa Club, but your experience with the African Exchange Linkage project is instructive. How can initiatives like this and partnerships between the stock exchange and MDBs create win-win outcomes for Africa financial system?
So two things and quickly. The first thing is the beauty of capital markets is they solve two issues at the same time, two birds with one stone. So they deal with financing and they deal with governance. So I advocate very strongly for very deep local African capital markets. But I have to point out that sometimes, a lot of times we don't understand them. You know, you have young guys with nice suits and funny slides who come and see you, and you don't realize the commitment that it is. So capital markets, if you want to develop them, they are built on trust. So it's important to develop a track record and have a story and be very consistent with it. The second very quick point is I want to tell the adage, the absent are always wrong. So Africans have to be extremely engaged and present with the international community to influence, to learn, and to continue to push our agendas. And many times we are upset and we want to leave the table, but it's very important to stay there. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we run out of time, but this is not the last word. This is not the end. Thank you so much, everybody. But ladies and gentlemen, don't move. We've got a bonus for you. I invite Dr. Mahmoud MOHIELDIN and Serge EKUE to remain seated while we can have a warm round of applause for all of panelists.
Right.
You can stay on stage with, and you can, yeah. Okay.
A photo for, thank you. Celebrate the moment. Don't put me in trouble.
So, Dr. MOHIELDIN, I pass the torch.
Yeah. Right. Thank you so much. So I've been promoted to be a moderator of for a few seconds. I got some training sitting next to Aurélie just now. I have you with me, please, closer. I was told there are some arrangements with that. So very quickly, we have three things as a follow-up to this very informative session that should end with a very practical answer that may start with a modest but significant solution to many of the issues raised just now on capital mobilization for Africa. But so how that will start? We'll start first by you, and then I may react. I was told to react nicely because you'll be saying great things. As always. And then I'll ask my good colleague and friend, Chris, to join us. And then there will be some slides to add to the confusion running at some stage as well to tell you what we are going to share with you as an initiative. So during the discussion, the different panelists touched upon issues related to gaps. There are opportunities. Some people were just stuck with this bad definition that, yes, there is money in the global system, which you agreed with, that there is a great deal of savings. But you Africans do not have bankable, investable pipeline of projects. Where do you see really the problem when it comes to mobilization of capital from within the continent, from outside the continent, and what could be the priorities with your rich understanding of the matter and equally important, your practice for many years?
Well, the question, I mean, when you look at the balance sheet of a bank, the liability side of the balance sheet, again, as I said earlier, we have to have the best capital structure. And it's key in the sense that no country has been positioned to develop itself with short debts and so short maturity and high interest rates. This doesn't work, and it has never worked anywhere in the world. This is one. The second thing, the question of the capital. Again, capital leads to capitalism. And we haven't seen any country in the world trying to develop itself without capital. Capital means who sits next to me the day my building falls over my head. This is it. And the shareholder who sit next to me. My creditor won't sit next to me. My creditor would just ask for its reimbursement. All right. So the problem we have is too high interest rates and too short maturities. Okay. This is on the liability side, and I have to add again that when it comes to capital mobilization, yes, there's sufficient saving in the world, and again I insist, the word is oversaving. BlackRock has under management 10 trillion US dollars, which is half of the US GDP. All right. So the capital is there. Now, how do we rechannel that? Again, on the on the liability side, again, it's all about the way we manage our portfolio, the way we manage our balance sheet. Well, if you look at the RMBS market, everything related to residential market, the securitization of the residential market, it's an untapped market, untapped. There's a huge potential, it's untapped. We have, BOAD has launched last year, this year by the way, this year, residential securitization. It worked, but again, we can definitely do much more. When it comes to commercial, same situation. The CMBS market is untapped. When you look at the trade and receivables market, huge market in Africa, untapped. So yes, the potential is there. We have to, when it comes to the mobilization of the domestic resources, we know how to do things. Now, on the asset side, you mentioned the bankable project. Yeah. I have to say...
Or investable project.
Yeah, okay.
Because you mentioned something about the optimal structure of capital that shouldn't be heavily dependent on debt alone, and it needs to have the right mix.
Yeah, you're right and wrong.
Yeah, well, it's good I'm right on something. Yeah. No, you made my day.
Yeah, you're right and wrong. You're wrong when you look at things in detail. We have launched in 2021 a sustainable bond, 5 times oversubscribed, blah, 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 with a coupon of 2.75%, all right?
Yeah.
And to achieve that, we have presented to our investors the pipeline.
Okay.
Where are we going to invest in, and how are we? And we have committed to the investors community that we would report on a regular basis. We would be 100% transparent, report exactly where the funds are, where we stand when it comes to the execution of the funding plan.
Right.
And it worked tremendously as I speak.
So this is the right part or the wrong part?
Absolutely, this is the right part.
Okay, good.
As I speak...
Give me the wrong, please.
No. As I speak, 100%, read my lips, 100% of the funds that we have been, that have been allocated have been totally, 100% of the issue, 100% has been allocated, fully allocated to green and social project, 100%.
Okay.
100%.
So
which
far, so
means
good.
that they are bankable projects.
Nice.
And that's a concrete example. The size of the issue was 750 million euro.
Okay.
All right. Now, where you write, again, in this question of bankable project, is that I strongly believe that the question is not the money.
Yeah.
The question is the quality of the project. So, and one of the sensitive elements here is funds dedicated to preparation, to preparation.
Yeah.
Yes, we have, at the BOAD, we have a fund dedicated to sovereign and public projects. Now, we are struggling, but we are getting there. We're struggling to get the same fund dedicated to the preparation on the private side, which is another story. You know, a good idea does not mean a good project.
Yeah.
And there's a gap, I can tell you, there's a huge gap from a very good idea sometimes with a bankable project. But it's work in progress, and I'm very optimistic. And the reason why I'm so optimistic is that when you look at the debt to GDP ratio of our countries, in our sub-region, we're hitting the 60%.
Yeah.
We are hitting the ceiling.
The CEO of the exchange mentioned that.
All right,
well.
so we are hitting the ceiling, which literally means that the way we've been funding our development for the past years, it's over.
Yeah.
It's definitely over.
You hit a ceiling.
Definitely over.
Okay.
What we're trying to do now, what we're doing now, is way to find deconsolidation project by which this project could impact the budgets of the Ministry of Finance, the budget, but not the stock of debt.
Right.
It makes the whole difference.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, we can spend a lot of time on debt and debt management, but I'll have all the time from now until the foreseeable future to talk about that. The Secretary General of the UN appointed few people, including myself, the former Prime Minister of Italy, Gentilini, the formidable former Minister of Finance of South Africa, Trevor Manuel, a couple of other colleagues from China, and a potential one from Africa again, and myself as a coordinator of this group, to search for solutions of the debt crisis. And one thing, just two things, not one. First, the debt to GDP ratio could be a good indicator, but perhaps for advanced economies. We need to look more on the debt service to receivables, especially if we are borrowing from foreign currency. The other thing, that sometimes you go to local markets, but if they are highly correlated with the foreign markets, we are still in the same problem. The third thing, when it comes to leveraging, and we are about to say something of an initiative that I hope that you will agree with its merits and its prospects, launched by BWB, and there are a few slides just to tell you what we're about here. What we are going to leverage, the billions to trillions notion that came from Addis, is leveraging private sector equity of long-term nature with the multilateral development banks and the public finance. What happened after 10 years of that practice, that we didn't leverage much, and we get only a fraction of the hope. Last figure on climate finance and green finance is telling us that $1 is mobilizing less than 22 cents. This is by OECD. So can we make a difference? And we have few seconds to mention that. I can ask Chris to join us as well. I know that you are coming earlier than planned. Can you come please to join us? Because the clock is ticking. And here, this is the solution of some of the areas of possible investments. We know that the world is not on track to achieve the SDGs. We know that there are gaps almost in everything, from the investment in human capital, investment in infrastructure, investment in resilience and greening the economy, investment in digital transformation. And please, for fellow Africans, don't be offended when you see these kinds of gaps, because if you read the report by the EU, prepared by former Prime Minister and head of the Commission of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, he said that the EU is in existential crisis unless it invests in all of what I mentioned now, including green transformation, digital transformation, and getting ready with the green infrastructure and green energy. And they need $900 billion per annum. Africa doesn't need much more than that, but you collect all of this, we are close, but more modest in some of the demands. Based on the points as well raised earlier by domestic resource mobilization, we can do better in leveraging the funding. But these are the gaps. more important in education, given that we all mentioned something about human capital and investing in people, resilient infrastructure for agriculture and food, energy transformation, including the investments required for reaching 300 million households with electricity, because without that, they cannot be part of the modern world. Green natural infrastructure and more investments in health and maternal and child health as well. Next slide, please, if any. Yes, and here is the solution, and Chris will tell us more about it, how the BWB joined forces with the CIF, the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, and the UBS Optimus Foundation to provide solutions, almost dealing with all of these issues, not just bridging gaps of funding, but gaps in knowledge, technical capacity, being a catalyst, dealing as well with the hurdles beyond the preparation of the pipeline that you mentioned, but dealing with issues related to the bureaucracy, the red tape, the list of 10 points raised by the World Bank in getting ready for business, which is the successor of doing business. The start is $1 billion to be a catalyst fund of public, private, philanthropic capital. And the advice here for countries heavily reliant on public finance and public projects, can the bureaucracies relax a bit, give way to the private sector for what it can really be doing as an efficient allocator of funds. And all of these lines of investment, Chris, especially in digital transformation and sustainability, they are subject to great deal of transformation in their technology. You mentioned solar and the solar index and the exposure. Good news is that the cost of producing electricity have been reduced dramatically. Bad news is if you are relying on bureaucracy to lead the way, you will be losing, because bureaucracies cannot shift with the changes in such technology. So we'll be relying on the private sector implementation. Bureaucracies are great in what they are created for. Regulators are important for the markets. Governments have the comparative advantage of public policy formulation, but business is for the business leaders, private sector, and private sector alone, unless it's exceptionally needed in some particular sectors. Part of the problems of that we were relying on inward-load solutions led by the public sector that is very much responsible for heavy indebtedness. This is a solution that relies on the benefits of wisdom for many years of practice. It's not coming outside the box, I hate this term. Nothing outside the box here. It's just rules of science and evidence-based solution for transformation. Did I say anything wrong so far?
Absolutely nothing.
Right. Go ahead.
It's very interesting, actually, Serge, to pick up on your point that goes to the very heart of, actually, as BWB as an institution, as a not-for-profit investment bank, we were set up on the basic premise that it's not the availability of cash that's the problem. It's the conditions for that cash to land, the capital to land, which is the problem. And I think, actually, this is where the Africa Capital Hub, the solution sits right at the heart of that challenge about that allocation and mobilizing resources. So as Dr. Mohieldin says, the Africa Capital Hub is designed to rapidly change the speed that development transactions are executed. It's all about unlocking that dormant philanthropic and private capital at scale. It will leverage the strengths of the financial ecosystem using 4 key transaction-focused attributes. First of all, the neutral capital centre. Secondly, the Africa Finance Framework. Thirdly, Africa Investment Specialists. And fourthly, as Dr. Mohieldin went through briefly, the technical assistance and capital raising support. So firstly, through the Neutral Capital Centre, ACH will facilitate investor engagement to develop financial structures, which again was the heart of some of the financial innovation that's been talked about today. It's about deploying philanthropic, public and private capital, optimising project returns whilst maximising impact. The neutrality of the centre ensures investors approach opportunities on a level playing field. I mean, that's a powerful proposition on its own, but it's not enough, we know that. That's why the ACH will be supported by the Africa Finance Framework. That's a sophisticated quantitative and qualitative tool that we've developed over the last 12 months, which
evaluates the viability and, I guess, investment appeal of projects, providing valuable information on opportunities for enhancing project investability, bankability, if you will, and maximising impact. The framework supports the structuring of those innovative financial instruments to ultimately accelerate project execution, get money to work at scale. The Neutral Capital Centre and the Africa Finance Framework, they create the operational backbone of the ACH, but the hub will also require a very strong element of human capital, our investment specialists. So the investment specialists work as development partners alongside ministries of finance to help support them in the development of those projects, providing transactional support, market knowledge, and bridging vital connections between project owners, investors, and government entities. And last but very much not least, the hub will provide that technical assistance and capital raising support to ensure that projects meet investor criteria and deliver measurable impact. And this architecture of 4 highly intertwined attributes will reduce deal friction, accelerate access to capital, promote investor diversity, resulting in the development, ultimately, of high-quality, high-impact project pipelines. I'd like to say 3 thanks, if I may, actually, before I pass the floor back. Firstly, for the generous support of the Children's Investment Fund Foundation and UBS Optimus Foundation for their support of the Africa Capital Hub. And secondly, I'm the mouthpiece here. My regional Africa team have worked absolutely tirelessly for the last 12 months to get us to the point here to launch the Africa Capital Hub, and I could not have done it without your unbelievable, unwavering support. And lastly, Dr. MOHIELDIN, for your guidance and wisdom as we've developed the hub, and your desire to help chair the advisory board will be a very powerful proposition. So thank you so much, Dr. MOHIELDIN, for your support. This is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. The 1 billion is just the beginning. It's not the end. We have huge ambitions. On that floor, I'll pass it back to yourself. Dr. MOHIELDIN.
Right. Thank you so much. That makes sense. Will it solve some of the problems? Chris made a formidable presentation of the promise. Living in Africa, leading main businesses in Africa, will this work?
Of course, it will, and the preparation and acceleration scheme that has been rightly described, is a key element of the value chain, and naturally, yeah, it would definitely help. Definitely, yes.
Very good. All right. So we're looking forward to your support, your partnership on this. And yes, and if you are in any of these lines of business mentioned by Chris, on the agriculture, energy, infrastructure, health and education, we're seeking partnerships. Advisory board will be with very experienced volunteers to lead this work from the continent and beyond. And we hope that in a year from now, through the good work of the team, and I know that they will be established soon in Kenya. There is going to be an office.
They're already there.
They're already there. All right. Okay. You are ahead as well of my count. That's fantastic. We are going to have the first advisory board very soon as well to get the updates. Having said that, we have one of 2 choices: either to condemn the darkness and the unfairness of the world and the insufficiency of funds and the inefficiency of disbursement and the heavy debt, or we can really have $1 billion of candles and lights to show us better way of transformation. Many thanks to BWB and to all of your partners, including the Save the Children and the UBS philanthropy that is joining as well. Thank you all, and fantastic end of this session. Thank you.